Ryan Dalton stood in the doorway of the house he'd shared with his wife Claire for 7 years. His arms crossed over his chest as he watched her struggle to carry their 3-week-old daughter through the December blizzard, her overweight frame shaking in the bitter cold. The joint bank account he drained that morning, every last cent of their savings, now sat safely transferred to his name only, ready to fund his wedding to Vanessa next month. The woman who just spat in Claire's face and called her a fat, worthless cow, while Ryan laughed. Claire clutched baby Emma tighter, her worn coat doing little against the snow that had just inherited a billion-dollar empire in her name. A secret letter from her late grandmother's attorney that had arrived that very morning, sitting unopened on the kitchen counter because Ryan had kicked her out before she could read it. But what would Ryan discover when he opened that invitation to his own wedding reception 6 weeks later? What would happen when the woman he'd thrown into the snow with her newborn appeared at his wedding to Vanessa, transformed, powerful, and ready to deliver a shock that would shatter both their lives forever? Would the mistress who spat on her still be smiling when she learned the truth about the empire Claire had just inherited? And what revenge had the discarded wife been planning in those 6 weeks that would make Ryan wish he'd never laid eyes on Vanessa? Claire's hands trembled as she held 3-week-old Emma against her chest, trying to shield the baby from the December wind that cut through her thin coat like knives. Behind her, the front door of the modest 2-story house slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the quiet suburban street. She heard Ryan's voice through the wood, already on the phone with Vanessa, his tone light and excited, discussing wedding venues as if he hadn't just thrown his wife and newborn daughter out into a blizzard. She remembered when they'd bought this house 5 years ago. Ryan had carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, young and hopeful. She'd been slimmer then, before the years of emotional eating had added the weight that Ryan now used as ammunition for his cruelty. Before the pregnancy that had added even more pounds. Pounds that hadn't had time to come off before Ryan had started bringing Vanessa around, introducing her as his colleague from the marketing firm. The snow was falling harder now, coating Claire's dark hair with white flakes. Emma stirred against her chest, making small sounds of distress. Claire adjusted the blanket around her daughter with numb fingers, her mind still reeling from the events of the past hour. It had started that morning when Ryan had come down to breakfast with divorce papers in hand. No warning, no conversation, just papers slapped on the kitchen table next to her oatmeal. Claire had stared at them in shock, Emma crying in her bassinet nearby, and when she'd looked up at Ryan with questions forming on her lips, Vanessa had walked out of the bedroom upstairs wearing Ryan's shirt. The humiliation had burned through Claire like acid. 7 years of marriage, 3 weeks since giving birth to his daughter, and he'd already moved his mistress into their home. But the worst had come when Claire tried to speak, tried to understand what was happening, and Vanessa had walked right up to her and spat in her face. Ryan had laughed. That sound would haunt Claire forever. Her husband's laughter as another woman's spit dripped down her cheek while she held their infant daughter. Claire had stumbled back, wiping her face with shaking hands, and that's when Ryan had told her about the bank account, their joint savings account, the one that held $15,000 they'd been saving for Emma's future, for emergencies, for their life together. He'd transferred every cent into his personal account that morning at 6 a.m. before the banks had even opened properly, using the online access they both had. The memory of checking her phone and seeing the zero balance made Claire's stomach clench even now. Standing in the snow, she'd been left with nothing. No money, no access to their funds, and a newborn who needed diapers and formula. When she'd protested, when she'd begged Ryan to at least leave her something for the baby, Vanessa had laughed and told her to go cry to your mommy. But Claire's mother had died 3 years ago, and her father had passed when she was 12. Her grandmother, the only family she had left, had died 6 months ago, leaving Claire even more alone in a world that suddenly felt hostile and cold. Ryan had given her 30 minutes to pack a bag, 30 minutes to gather clothes for herself and Emma, to grab what she could carry, while Vanessa had followed her from room to room, making comments about Claire's weight, about how no man would ever want her now, about how she was doing Claire a favor by taking Ryan off her hands. Claire shifted Emma's weight, her arms aching. The baby was small, only 7 pounds at birth, but carrying her in the single duffel bag she'd managed to pack felt like carrying the world. Her car was gone too. Ryan had taken her keys, claiming the car was in his name, even though they'd bought it together. When she'd reached for her phone to call an Uber, she discovered Ryan had canceled their family phone plan. Her phone was just dead weight in her pocket now. A car drove past, its headlights cutting through the falling snow, and didn't stop. Claire started walking, her feet already numb in her worn boots. She had nowhere to go. Her few friends from college had drifted away over the years, partly because Ryan had never liked when she went out without him, and partly because Claire had been too ashamed of her weight gain to maintain those friendships. She thought of her grandmother then, of Eleanor Morrison, the sharp-eyed woman who'd raised Claire after her father died. Eleanor had been wealthy once, Claire remembered, back before some family tragedy that was never fully explained. She'd lived simply in Claire's childhood, in a small apartment in Queens, but there had been hints of a grander past. Photos in silver frames of Eleanor at galas, wearing designer gowns. Stories about Europe, about businesses and boardrooms. Eleanor had died suddenly 6 months ago, a heart attack that took her before Claire could say goodbye. The funeral had been simple, and Claire had been 6 months pregnant, grieving alone because Ryan had claimed he had to work and couldn't take time off. She'd sat in that funeral home, her hands on her swollen belly, and wished her grandmother could have met Emma. There had been mention of a will, Claire remembered now through the haze of cold and exhaustion. An attorney had sent a letter, but it had arrived during those chaotic first weeks after Emma's birth, and Claire had set it aside, meaning to open it when she had the energy. It was probably still sitting on the kitchen counter in the house she no longer had access to. Emma cried louder, her small face scrunching up in distress. Claire ducked under the awning of a closed bookstore, trying to shield them both from the worst of the wind. She opened her coat and pulled Emma inside against her body heat, wrapping them both as tightly as she could. Her phone buzzed, one last gasp of battery life, a text message from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, Claire opened it. It was a photo, Ryan and Vanessa kissing in Claire's kitchen, Vanessa's hand showing off an engagement ring. The message below read, "Thanks for the wedding fun, fatty. Enjoy the streets." Claire closed her eyes, feeling tears freeze on her cheeks. But beneath the devastation, beneath the humiliation and fear, something else stirred. Something hard and cold that matched the winter air around her. Ryan had taken everything from her. He'd stolen her money, her home, her dignity. He'd laughed while his mistress spat on her. He'd thrown her out into a blizzard with their 3-week-old daughter. But he'd forgotten one thing. Clare Morrison Dalton wasn't just Ryan's fat wife. She wasn't just the woman he'd discarded. She was Eleanor Morrison's granddaughter. And Eleanor Morrison had never raised a quitter. Her phone died completely, the screen going black. Claire held Emma close and started walking again. There was a women's shelter 3 miles away. She'd seen signs for it before. 3 miles in a blizzard with a newborn seemed impossible. But Claire was learning that impossible was just another word for the only option left. Behind her, in the house with its warm lights and stolen comfort, Ryan was probably already planning his wedding to Vanessa. Planning how they'd spend Claire's money, how they'd live in Claire's house, how they'd build their life on the ruins of what they'd destroyed. Let them plan, Claire thought, her jaw setting with determination despite the cold that was seeping into her bones. Let them celebrate and laugh and think they'd won. Because somewhere in the back of her mind, Claire remembered Eleanor's favorite saying, repeated over and over during Claire's childhood, "The Morrison women don't break. We wait, we watch, and we win." Claire didn't know what winning would look like yet, but as she walked through the snow with Emma breathing softly against her chest, she made herself a promise. Ryan and Vanessa would regret this day. They would regret every laugh, every cruelty, every moment they thought they destroyed her. She just had to survive this night first. One step at a time through the snow, holding her daughter close, Clare Morrison Dalton walked toward whatever future awaited her. And though she didn't know it yet, that letter sitting unopened on her kitchen counter was about to change everything. Ryan Dalton woke up the morning after kicking Claire out with a sense of satisfaction spreading through his chest like warmth. Vanessa was still asleep beside him, her blonde hair spread across the pillow that used to be Claire's, her body taking up the space his wife had occupied for 7 years. He stretched, careful not to wake her, and padded downstairs to make coffee. The house felt different without Claire's presence, lighter somehow. No more sad looks from across the room. No more awkward silence when Vanessa came by. No more excuses about why he needed to work late or take weekend trips with his colleague. Everything was out in the open now, clean and simple. He'd meant to do it months ago, really. The attraction to Vanessa had started a year back when she joined his marketing firm as a junior associate. 26 years old, fresh and exciting, she'd made 33-year-old Ryan feel young again, made him remember who he'd been before marriage had tied him down, before Clare had let herself go and become the overweight, tired woman who'd greeted him every evening. The pregnancy had been the final straw. Clare had gained 60 pounds carrying Emma, and after the birth, she'd looked even worse. Stretch marks, exhaustion, constantly covered in spit up and looking perpetually disheveled. Vanessa, by contrast, was immaculate. Always perfectly made up, always dressed well, always ready for adventure. Ryan poured his coffee and opened his banking app, looking at the balance with satisfaction. $15,000, all his now. Vanessa had expensive tastes, and the wedding she wanted wasn't cheap. Claire would have argued about spending that much. She'd always been too practical, too cautious. But Vanessa understood that life was meant to be lived, that experiences mattered more than savings accounts. He heard a rustle and looked up to see Vanessa descending the stairs, wearing one of his t-shirts and looking like something from a magazine. She smiled at him, that dazzling smile that had first caught his attention, and crossed the kitchen to kiss him. "Good morning, future husband," she purred, taking his coffee cup and drinking from it. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," Ryan admitted. It was true. No crying baby, no Claire sighing and shifting beside him all night. Just Vanessa, soft and warm and uncomplicated. Vanessa set down the coffee and wrapped her arms around his waist. "I've been thinking about the wedding. The Riverside Plaza Ballroom is available in 6 weeks. It's expensive, but it's stunning. Huge windows overlooking the water, capacity for 200 guests." 200? Ryan raised his eyebrows. "That's a lot." "It's our special day," Vanessa said, pouting slightly. "Don't you want everyone to see how happy we are? Don't you want to celebrate?" Ryan thought about the $15,000. It would cover most of the venue and catering, but not much else. Still, he could put some on credit cards, maybe take a personal loan. His salary was decent, and without Claire's expenses to worry about, he'd have more flexibility. "Okay," he said, kissing her forehead. "The Riverside Plaza it is." Vanessa squealed and hugged him tighter. "I love you so much. You're nothing like my ex. He was so cheap, always worried about money. You understand that life is for living." Ryan felt a swell of pride. He was nothing like Claire either. No longer the boring married man counting pennies and talking about retirement savings. He was starting fresh, and it felt incredible. Later that afternoon, while Vanessa was out shopping for wedding magazines, Ryan was cleaning up the kitchen when he noticed a letter on the counter. It was addressed to Clare Morrison Dalton with a law firm's return address, Peterson, Harrison Associates, attorneys at law. The postmark was from 2 weeks ago. Curious, Ryan opened it. The letter was brief and formal. "Dear Mrs. Dalton, this letter serves as notification that you are the primary beneficiary of the estate of Eleanor Margaret Morrison, deceased. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the distribution of assets and your inheritance. Time-sensitive materials require your immediate attention. Sincerely, Robert Peterson, senior partner." Ryan frowned, reading it again. Eleanor Morrison had been Claire's grandmother, he knew. The old woman had died 6 months ago. Claire had been upset, though Ryan hadn't paid much attention at the time. He'd been busy with Vanessa, and Claire's grandmother had been just another old person dying, as old people did. But primary beneficiary, and estate, and distribution of assets caught his attention. Eleanor had lived simply in some small apartment in Queens. Claire had always said her grandmother didn't have much money, but law firms didn't send formal letters about estates unless there was something worth inheriting. Ryan pulled out his phone and Googled Eleanor Margaret Morrison. The first few results were obituaries and condolences, But then, buried several pages deep, he found something that made his stomach drop. An old news article from 1995, Morrison heiress walks away from fortune after family tragedy. Ryan clicked on it with trembling hands. The article was brief from a business journal. Eleanor Morrison, 45, sole heir to the Morrison manufacturing fortune valued at approximately $800 million, has reportedly walked away from her inheritance following a series of personal tragedies. Sources close to the family indicate that Morrison, devastated by recent losses, has declined her position on the company board and relinquished active management of her assets to a trust. Morrison Manufacturing, founded in 1932, produces industrial components and has facilities in 7 states. Morrison could not be reached for comment. Ryan read it 3 times, his heart pounding. $800 million in 1995. What would that be worth now, 30 years later? Especially if it had been sitting in a trust, managed by professionals, growing with the market. He searched for more information, his hands shaking. Morrison Manufacturing was still operational, now a subsidiary of a larger corporation. The trust that Eleanor had established, he found mentions of it in various business filings, but no clear numbers on its current value. His phone rang. Vanessa's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, baby," she said brightly. "I found the perfect dress. It's $3,000, but it's a Vera Wang, and I look incredible in it." I need to call you back," Ryan interrupted, his mind racing. "What?" "Ryan, I'm at the boutique right now and—" "Later, Vanessa. Something came up." He hung up before she could protest and immediately dialed the number on the law firm's letterhead. A receptionist answered. "Peterson, Harris & Associates. How may I help you?" "Yes, I'm calling about a letter regarding Eleanor Morrison's estate. My name is Ryan Dalton, and—" "Are you Clare Morrison Dalton?" the receptionist interrupted. "No, I'm her husband. Well, ex-husband. We just divorced, but—" "I'm sorry, sir, but we can only discuss estate matters with the named beneficiary. If Mrs. Dalton wishes to speak with us, she can call directly. But I need to know about the inheritance. How much—" "Sir, I cannot discuss confidential client information with anyone except Mrs. Dalton herself. Have a good day." The line went dead. Ryan stared at his phone, his mind whirling. He'd just thrown Clare out. He'd stolen their joint savings. He'd divorced her and humiliated her and left her with nothing. And she was about to inherit a fortune that could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "No," he said aloud to the empty kitchen. "No, no, no." But even as denial flooded through him, he knew the truth. Clare hadn't known. That letter had been sitting on the counter unopened. She'd walked out into that blizzard yesterday with no idea that she was one of the wealthiest women in America, and he'd just made himself her enemy. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of wedding preparations that felt increasingly hollow to Ryan, though he couldn't admit this to Vanessa. She was in her element, choosing flowers and table settings and designing invitations with a graphic designer who cost more per hour than Ryan had expected. The credit cards were piling up with debt, but Vanessa waved away his concerns. "It's our special day," she kept saying. "You can't put a price on happiness." But Ryan couldn't stop thinking about that letter, about the Morrison fortune that Clare now presumably knew about. He'd tried calling the attorney's office 3 more times and had been rebuffed each time. He'd attempted to find Clare, but she seemed to have vanished completely. No social media updates, no trace of her at the women's shelter he'd checked, no forwarding address. He'd even driven by the house where Clare's grandmother had lived, but it was empty, already sold according to the building super. When Ryan had pressed for information about where Eleanor's things had gone, the super had shrugged and said, "Some law firm handled it all. Professional movers came and cleaned everything out in one day. Must have been important to be done that fast." Vanessa noticed his distraction, but misinterpreted it as pre-wedding jitters. She doubled down on the planning, adding more expensive details to their day. A champagne fountain, a live band instead of a DJ, designer party favors for their 200 guests. Each addition made Ryan's chest tighten with anxiety. He'd borrowed $20,000 from his parents, claiming it was for a down payment on a new car. He'd maxed out 2 credit cards. The $15,000 he'd taken from Clare was long gone, consumed by deposits and down payments. And still, Vanessa wanted more. "My sister's wedding was beautiful," she said one evening as they reviewed the seating chart in what used to be Ryan and Claire's bedroom. "But ours is going to be legendary. Everyone's going to be talking about it for years." Ryan forced a smile, but inside he was calculating. His debt was now approaching $50,000. His credit score was plummeting. And somewhere out there, Claire was sitting on a potential fortune that made his problems look microscopic. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd left Claire partly because he'd thought she was holding him back financially with her practical, careful approach to money. He'd thought Vanessa's boldness and ambition would lead to a better life. Instead, he was drowning in debt while his ex-wife was probably signing papers that made her wealthier than he could imagine. 3 weeks before the wedding, Vanessa came home with an idea that made Ryan's blood run cold. "I was thinking," she said, dropping shopping bags on the couch, "we should invite Claire to the wedding." Ryan looked up from his laptop where he'd been researching bankruptcy options. "What? Claire, your ex-wife. We should send her an invitation." Vanessa's eyes gleamed with something that made Ryan uncomfortable. "I want her to see us together, to see what she lost. I want her to watch us celebrate while she's probably living in some dumpy apartment with that baby. It would be the ultimate victory." "Vanessa, I don't think—" "Oh, come on. Don't tell me you're still protective of her feelings. She needs to see that we won, Ryan. She needs to see that taking you from her was the best thing that ever happened to us." Vanessa pulled out her phone. "Do you have her contact information? Or should I send it to her grandmother's old address?" Ryan's mind raced. Part of him wanted to refuse, to keep Claire as far from this wedding as possible. But another part, the part that had been panicking for 6 weeks about money, saw an opportunity. If Claire came to the wedding, he might be able to talk to her. To apologize, maybe. To explain that the divorce had been a mistake. To somehow get back into her good graces before she realized her full financial situation. It was manipulation, pure and simple. But Ryan was desperate. "I'll handle it," he said. "I'll send her an invitation." Vanessa clapped her hands together, delighted. "Perfect. I can't wait to see her face when she walks in and sees everything we've built together." "God, Ryan, this is going to be so satisfying." Ryan nodded, already composing the message in his mind. He'd make it seem friendly, apologetic even. He'd suggest that despite everything, they should remain civil for Emma's sake. He'd set the hook carefully, hoping that Claire still had enough feelings for him, enough vulnerability, that she'd take the bait. He sent the invitation through a mutual acquaintance from his office, someone who owed him a favor. The message was carefully worded. "Claire, I know things ended badly between us, but I hope we can be mature about this situation. Vanessa and I are getting married, and for Emma's sake, I think it would be good if we could all move forward peacefully. I'd like to invite you to our wedding as a gesture of goodwill. It would mean a lot to both of us if you could come. Please know that I wish you well, and I hope you're doing okay." He didn't mention the money. He didn't mention the letter from the attorney. He kept his tone gentle and conciliatory, the way he used to talk to Claire when they'd first dated, before resentment had poisoned everything between them. 3 days later, he got a response through the same mutual friend. Just 3 words. "I'll be there." Ryan read those words over and over, trying to divine Claire's emotional state from them. Was she hurt, angry, or had she accepted her situation and moved on? He had no way to know, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. Vanessa was thrilled with the confirmation. She actually said yes? "Oh my God, this is perfect. I'm going to make sure we have a photographer capture her reaction when she sees us. This is going to be everything I dreamed of." The wedding day arrived with brilliant sunshine that seemed to mock Ryan's inner turmoil. The Riverside Plaza ballroom was indeed stunning, all floor-to-ceiling windows and elegant decor. Vanessa had spared no expense, and the result was breathtaking. White flowers everywhere, crystal chandeliers, a cake that cost more than Ryan's first car. Guests arrived in expensive clothes, filling the ballroom with laughter and champagne toasts. Vanessa's family was there, beaming with pride at their daughter's good fortune. Ryan's parents sat in the front row, his mother looking slightly concerned at the extravagance, but keeping her thoughts to herself. His father kept checking his watch, as if calculating the debt-per-minute ratio of this event. Ryan stood at the altar in his rented tuxedo. Even that had been expensive. But Vanessa had insisted on a designer, and watched guests file in. Any minute now, Vanessa would walk down the aisle, and he'd commit himself to this new life. A life built on stolen money, maxed credit cards, and the ruins of his first marriage. He glanced at the doors, wondering if Clare would actually show. Part of him hoped she wouldn't, that he could get through this day without having to face what he'd done. But another part desperately needed to see her, to gauge whether there was any chance of salvaging something from the disaster he'd created. The music started. Vanessa appeared at the end of the aisle, resplendent in her $3,000 dress, her smile radiant. Ryan's breath caught. Not from love, he realized with sudden clarity, but from panic. This was it. This was the moment that would lock him into this decision forever. Then, just as Vanessa took her first step down the aisle, the ballroom doors opened. Clare Morrison Dalton walked in. But it wasn't the Clare that Ryan had last seen 6 weeks ago. That woman had been broken, overweight, dressed in worn clothes, carrying a crying baby through a blizzard. That woman had been someone he could dismiss, someone he could pity or ridicule or forget. This woman was transformed. Clare had lost at least 40 pounds, her figure now slender and elegant in a designer dress that Ryan recognized as couture even from across the room. Her hair, which had been lank and unwashed when he'd thrown her out, was now styled perfectly, dark and glossy. She wore jewelry that caught the light. Real diamonds, Ryan's mind registered dimly, not the costume pieces she'd worn during their marriage, but it was her face that stopped everyone's breath. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying. She wasn't showing any emotion at all. She simply stood there, poised and powerful, looking at Ryan and Vanessa with the cool assessment of someone who held all the cards. Behind her, 2 security guards in expensive suits flanked the doorway. And next to Clare stood a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, carrying a briefcase, who Ryan suddenly recognized from the law firm's website. Robert Peterson, senior partner at Peterson, Harris and Associates. The music faltered. Vanessa froze halfway down the aisle, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Every guest turned to stare at Clare, whispers rippling through the crowd like wildfire. Clare took 3 steps into the ballroom, her heels clicking on the marble floor with absolute authority. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the stunned silence, and every word was a hammer blow to Ryan's chest. "Thank you for the invitation, Ryan," Clare said, her tone pleasant and conversational, as if she were commenting on the weather. "I'm so glad you wanted me here to celebrate your special day, because I have some news to share with everyone." She paused, letting the tension build, her eyes never leaving Ryan's face. 6 weeks ago, when you kicked me and our newborn daughter out into a blizzard, when you stole our joint savings to fund this wedding, when your fiancé spat in my face while you laughed, I was actually on the verge of reading a very important letter. Robert Peterson stepped forward, opening his briefcase with practiced precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority, "I am here to inform you that Mrs. Clare Morrison Dalton is the sole heir to the Morrison Manufacturing Trust, established by her late grandmother, Eleanor Morrison. The current value of this trust, including all assets, properties, and controlling shares, has been assessed at $2.8 billion. The ballroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, the sound of Vanessa's bouquet hitting the floor. Ryan felt the blood drain from his face, his vision tunneling. 2.8 billion, not millions, billions. Clare smiled then, and it was the most terrifying expression Ryan had ever seen. "The letter you left sitting on the counter, Ryan, the one you opened after you threw me out, that was the attorney's office trying to reach me about my inheritance. When I finally made it to a shelter with Emma, when I finally had access to a phone again, I called them. And do you know what Mr. Peterson told me?" She took another step forward, and the crowd parted before her like she was royalty. "He told me that my grandmother had been waiting until I had a child to release the full inheritance to me. She wanted to make sure the Morrison money would go to someone who understood family, who valued loyalty. And the morning you kicked me out, Ryan, was the morning I became eligible to inherit everything." Ryan tried to speak, but no words came out. Beside him, His best man had taken several steps back, as if trying to disassociate himself from what was happening. "So here's what's going to happen," Claire continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. "Mr. Peterson has already filed several lawsuits on my behalf. One against you, Ryan, for theft of marital assets, that $15,000 you stole. I have records of every cent, and in addition to returning it with interest, you'll be paying substantial punitive damages. Another lawsuit for fraud, since you initiated the divorce without disclosing that you were already cohabitating with Vanessa, which is illegal in this state." Vanessa made a choking sound. Ryan looked at her, saw the horror dawning in her eyes as she realized what this meant. "And Vanessa," Claire said, turning to address the blonde woman directly, "you should know that my attorneys have also filed a civil suit against you for assault. Spitting on someone is battery in this state. You'll be hearing from the police shortly." The security guards stepped forward, one of them holding what looked like legal documents. Claire wasn't finished. "But more than that, I've spent the last 6 weeks learning about my grandmother's business. Morrison Manufacturing has government contracts, major corporate partnerships, and this morning I made some calls. Ryan, your marketing firm, the one you're so proud of, your biggest client accounts for 40% of your revenue. I bought that client's company 2 hours ago. You're both fired, effective immediately." Ryan swayed on his feet. His firm couldn't survive losing their biggest client, his salary, his reputation, his career, all gone in a single sentence from the woman he'd discarded. "As for this wedding," Claire said, gesturing to the expensive decor, the champagne fountain, the designer cake, "I spoke with the venue management this morning. The Riverside Plaza is owned by a subsidiary of Morrison Holdings. I own this building, Ryan, and I've decided to donate the rental fee you paid to a women's shelter that helps mothers and newborns. The same shelter that took me and Emma in 6 weeks ago when you threw us out into the snow." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, showing it to the crowd. On the screen was the photo Vanessa had sent that first night, Ryan and Vanessa kissing in the kitchen, Vanessa flashing her engagement ring, with the cruel message, "Thanks for the wedding fund, fatty. Enjoy the streets." "This text was sent to me hours after I gave birth to our daughter and was kicked out of my home," Claire said, her voice finally showing emotion, not pain, but fury. "I've had 6 weeks to think about it, 6 weeks to heal, to lose the baby weight, to learn about my inheritance, and to plan exactly how I would respond to your cruelty." She put her phone away and smiled again, that terrible, powerful smile. "Congratulations on your wedding day, Ryan and Vanessa. I hope you enjoy explaining to your 200 guests why the ceremony is being canceled, why you've both lost your jobs, and why you'll be spending the next several years in court. I hope the $15,000 you stole from me was worth it." Claire turned to leave, her heels clicking with finality, but she paused at the door, looking back one last time. "Oh, and Ryan, you should know that the first thing I did with my inheritance was set up a trust fund for Emma. She'll never want for anything. She'll never be vulnerable the way you tried to make me vulnerable. She'll never need you." With that, Clare Morrison Dalton, billionaire heiress, and the woman Ryan Dalton had laughed at while she walked through a blizzard, walked out of the ballroom, and out of his life forever. Behind her, she left chaos. Vanessa was crying, mascara running down her face. Ryan had collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. Guests were frantically pulling out their phones, texting and calling, spreading the news of the most dramatic wedding interruption in the city's history. And somewhere in the crowd, Ryan's father turned to his mother and said quietly, "I think our son just made the biggest mistake of his life." Outside, Claire slid into a black Mercedes where Emma waited with a nanny, sleeping peacefully in her car seat. Claire looked at her daughter, 7 weeks old now, healthy and safe, and felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace, but close enough. "Mrs. Dalton," her driver said respectfully, "where to?" Claire thought about the future stretching before her, about the empire she now controlled, the opportunities ahead, the life she could build for herself and Emma. She thought about Ryan and Vanessa, about the karma that had caught up with them in the most spectacular way possible. "Home," she said finally, not the house she'd shared with Ryan, which she'd already arranged to sell. Not her grandmother's old apartment, which held too many memories. But a penthouse she'd purchased last week in Manhattan, with views of the city and enough space for Emma to grow up surrounded by love and security. As the Mercedes pulled away from the Riverside Plaza, Clare Morrison Dalton allowed herself a small smile. The fat wife that Ryan had thrown into the snow was gone forever. In her place was a woman who'd learned that the best revenge wasn't anger or vindictiveness, but simply becoming so powerful that those who'd hurt you could never reach you again. And as for what happened next, that was a story for another day.